You remember summer vacation when you were 8 years old. It felt endless. 3 months stretched out like an entire year of its own. The days blurred together in the best possible way. One long stretch of bike rides and boredom and discovery. Now a summer disappears in what feels like 3 weeks. You blink, and it is already fall, and you cannot quite explain where June went. Most people call this time flying as you get older. It is one of those phrases repeated so often it stops sounding strange. But the real answer is far stranger than a phrase. Your brain is not losing track of time. It is rewriting how time gets recorded in the first place, and it has been doing this to you since the day you were born. Start with a simple experiment. Close your eyes. Try to silently estimate when 60 seconds have passed, without counting numbers in your head. A psychologist named Peter Mangan at the University of Virginia ran a version of this test on people ranging from young adults in their 20s to adults well into their 60s and 70s. The instructions were the same for everyone. Sit quietly. Signal when you believe a minute has gone by. No clocks, no counting, no cues from the room. The younger participants tended to stop close to the real 60-second mark. The older participants let more real time slip by before they felt a minute had actually passed. Some let nearly 20% more time elapse before their internal sense of a minute caught up with the clock on the wall. What does that actually mean? It suggests something is speeding up inside the body, not slowing down. If your internal sense of a minute takes longer to fill than an actual clock minute, then real time is moving faster relative to your inner clock. The years themselves are not moving quicker. You are. Why would an internal clock change at all? One idea researchers point to involves dopamine, a brain chemical tied to attention, reward, and the brain's internal timekeeping systems. Dopamine activity tends to decline gradually across adulthood, and some scientists who study how the brain marks intervals of time believe this decline plays a role in why the felt pace of a day shifts with age. It remains an active and debated area of research. Not a fully settled fact, but it lines up with something people report at every stage of life. Time feels different depending on what is happening inside the nervous system, not only on what the calendar happens to say. This idea is not new, either. Over a century ago, the philosopher and psychologist William James wrote about it in his book Principles of Psychology, published in 1890. James proposed something now called proportional theory, and it is almost embarrassingly simple. A year to a 5-year-old is 1/5 of that child's entire life so far. A year to a 50-year-old is 1/50th, the exact same 365 days on the calendar. A completely different fraction of everything that child or that adult has ever known or experienced. Does that fully explain it, though? A math ratio alone does not capture why one particular week can feel like an entire month, while a different month can feel like a single lazy afternoon. Proportion might set the baseline. Something else has to explain the texture. This is where a neuroscientist named David Eagleman enters the picture, with one of the more unusual experiments in the field. Eagleman ran a study, published in the journal PLOS ONI in 2007, using something most volunteers would rather have avoided entirely. Participants were dropped in controlled free fall, backwards, from a platform into a safety net below, without knowing the exact instant they would be released. Afterward, each person was asked to estimate how long their own fall had lasted, and to compare it to watching someone else fall the same distance. They overestimated their own fall, consistently, and by a meaningful margin. Their fall felt longer to live through than it looked from the outside. Here is the twist that makes the study worth remembering. Eagleman also had participants wear a device on their wrist that flickered numbers too quickly for the eye to read under ordinary conditions. If time were truly slowing down for them in the moment, the way a camera shifts into slow motion, they should have been able to read the flickering numbers during the fall. They could not. Their eyes processed information at the exact same speed as always. So what was actually happening, if not their eyes speeding up? Not their perception in the moment, their memory of the moment afterward. Fear floods the brain with signals that essentially say, "This matters. Remember everything about this." The brain responds by laying down memory more densely than usual, recording far more detail per second than it would during an ordinary walk to the mailbox. Later, when that memory gets played back and measured, more detail reads as more time having passed. The fall itself was not slow. The memory of the fall is simply thick. This single idea, memory density, unlocks almost everything else about why time seems to speed up with age. Think about the density of memory, the way you might think about a photo album or a phone full of pictures from a single day. A vacation day filled with an unfamiliar city, a new meal, an unfamiliar street corner, and a conversation with a stranger gets recorded in dozens of separate, vivid memories, each one tagged with sensory detail. A single Tuesday at a job you have worked for 6 years, driving the same commute, sitting at the same desk, eating the same lunch at the same hour, might get recorded as one thin memory, or absorbed into no distinct memory at all, folded into a general sense of, that was probably a normal week. Now zoom out to an entire year. Childhood is packed with firsts. First day of school. First bike ride without hands on the handlebars. First heartbreak. First job interview. Each first gets etched in as its own distinct memory, thick with detail, because the brain treats novelty as urgent and worth preserving. Adulthood, especially the routine stretches of it, produces far fewer firsts. Fewer new memories get filed away. And when you look back at that year later, searching your own memory for evidence of how long it actually took, you find less material to sort through. A thin folder of memories reads, retroactively, as a short amount of time. Not because the days themselves were short while you lived them, because your brain judged most of those days unworthy of a separate file and quietly declined to keep one. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. This means the speeding up of time is not really about time at all. It is about how much of your life your brain considers worth remembering, filtered, and compressed without ever asking your permission. Does this happen to everyone at the exact same pace, on the exact same schedule? Not necessarily. People who travel often, switch careers, move to new cities, or take up unfamiliar physical skills in adulthood tend to report that certain years feel unusually long and rich in memory, even well into their 40s and 50s. Meanwhile, a year spent almost entirely inside one comfortable, well-worn routine tends to compress in memory almost immediately, sometimes within weeks of it ending. This pattern shows up consistently enough across research on memory and aging that scientists treat novelty, rather than birthdays, as the real variable driving the feeling. So the years are not accelerating on their own, indifferent to what you do with them. Your personal calendar of firsts is simply running dry, unless you make a habit of restocking it. This is not a reason to panic about getting older, and it is not a medical condition to diagnose in yourself or anyone else watching this. It is simply how memory storage and time perception appear to be linked, based on research spanning more than 100 years, from a philosopher's notebook in the 1890s to a modern neuroscience lab dropping volunteers into nets. If you ever notice sudden or severe changes in your memory, especially paired with confusion or disorientation, that is worth discussing with a healthcare professional, since this video covers the general science of perception rather than personal medical advice. For the everyday version of the feeling, though, the fix hiding inside the research is almost absurdly simple. If dense, novel memories are what stretch time out in hindsight, then manufacturing novelty on purpose stretches it out too. A new route to work instead of the usual one. A conversation with someone outside your usual circle of friends or coworkers. A weekend in a town you have never once visited, even if it sits only an hour from your front door. None of it needs to be dramatic or expensive. It only needs to be unfamiliar enough that the brain flags it as worth keeping. Try this the next time an entire week feels like it vanished without leaving a trace behind. Ask yourself, honestly, how many genuinely new moments happened inside it? Not new information you scrolled past on a screen. New experience, something your body or your senses actually encountered for the first time that week. If the honest answer is none, that absence is very likely why the week left almost no footprint in your memory. Children are not somehow better at experiencing time than adults are. They are simply forced into novelty constantly by circumstance, because nearly everything around them is new. Adulthood removes that built-in supply of firsts and quietly replaces it with routine, which is efficient for getting through a day, but fairly brutal for memory density. The good news, if there is one built into all this research, is that novelty, unlike childhood itself, can be manufactured on purpose at any age, for as long as you keep choosing to. Notice how this reframes the entire complaint people make about getting older. Nobody actually mourns the passing of Tuesdays. What people mourn is the sense that an entire year slipped by without leaving much behind to show for it. That feeling is not a verdict on your life. It is closer to a receipt, printed by your own memory, listing only the moments it judged significant enough to keep. A short receipt does not mean a wasted year. It usually just means a repetitive one. Change what goes into the year, and the receipt changes with it, whether you are 25 or 75. You remember that summer when you were 8 years old. It felt endless, Not because the clock on the wall moved any slower that particular year, but because every single day inside it was strange and new enough to be worth keeping. This summer will end quickly, the way most adult summers quietly do. The real question was never why time speeds up as you get older. It is whether you are willing to make next summer worth remembering.